Okay, so we have our Canvas webpage up here. And the first thing I wanted to run through was a few of the assignments. And I've actually pushed them back. Even in when I teach this class in person, right, with students in the classroom and shop, we always have a plethora of login issues where passwords are messed up, or just, you know, people are, you're navigating, you know, multiple new websites. So the first like group of assignments always gets a little bit messed up. I pushed some assignments back to give folks a little bit more time to get those done if they were having problems. And I know folks were having problems because my email account was getting blown up today with different issues. So how do you see when stuff is due? I think the easiest way to do it is to go to the calendar. So I'm going to click on the calendar on the side here. And it shows some assignments. You know what it doesn't show though? Oh, there it goes. Okay. I got worried it wasn't showing all the assignments, but it is. This is like my test student login. So the assignment that I completed under this login is crossed out because I completed that assignment. So we have a what are your projects, where folks would take a picture of what they're working on and post it under the discussion board. And then these ones, which were due today, I pushed those back to give folks a few more time, a few more hours, or basically another day to work on these, because we were having various login problems or Briggs and Stratton problems, so I pushed those back. So I think that's the easiest way to see what's due, and I'm trying to be consistent of having things line up with like a weekly Monday thing, so that if folks can't really work on their class activities until the weekend because they're out, you know, working a real job that is not put on pause for our pandemic or anything, that they could work on that over the weekend and get it turned in. So that's the course calendar, and I think it's a handy way to see where you're at in the course. I'm going to go back to our course, and I'm then going to go to the modules tab. Canvas defaults to having all of these different clickable items on this left-hand side, but I've tried to link everything back to modules. So if you just went to modules, all the information should be there. So as we go through the class, right now we're kind of moving through this module 1 and finishing up module 1, which module 1 information basically focuses on learning the parts of our engine and learning how an engine works. And fortunately, you know, Briggs and Stratton and Still have both done a pretty good job of putting together a lot of videos that are, quite frankly, better than I could make on my own, that explain this stuff. I do have these different pictures I loaded just because I think you learn a lot by just looking at the parts and knowing what they're labeled as. I think the first part of learning how something works is kind of studying the parts, and I'm a big pictures guy, so looking at pictures I think is pretty darn helpful. If I go back to modules and I scroll down to this module 1, what you'll also find is that this module 1 lines up with kind of the first thing we're working on with Briggs and Stratton. Now, to make this work, like I do have links in here to Briggs and Stratton, but if you're not already logged into the Power Portal, Briggs and Stratton's website, the link won't work. So if I click this Briggs and Stratton 4-cycle theory training, which is the certification that we need to do, it does open up right to it, but that's because I already went to the Power Portal and I logged in. So if I wasn't logged in, it would take you to that login screen and say, hey, you need to log in. Briggs and Stratton's kind of interesting how they've set up their online training. So this is their main website. So if you were working at a small engine repair shop on Briggs and Stratton engines, you would use this website every day as a mechanic or as a service writer. I mean, they use this website for everything. We're mostly going to use this tab here that says Power Channel. However, if you were, let's say you were a technician, you might click the Briggs and Stratton logo and you would go over here to repair manuals. And then from there, you can basically search up whatever repair manual you're working on. They even have like the early 1900s engines. They have the old vintage engines in here as well, all the manuals there. So this manual that I'm holding in my hands, that we would normally be using a paper copy in class, the complete PDF is on here for you through this website. So to search it, you do have to know a little bit about what you're looking for. So I'm going to type in, because I got the title of the manual here. It says single cylinder OHV engines. I'm going to type that in. And while I am typing that in, can anybody answer for me, what does OHV stand for? Does anybody know? And you could post it on the chat too. If you're like, I don't like the sound of my voice, you can do it that way.
It was overhead, right?
Yeah. Overhead valve?
Yeah. Oh, yes, correct. Great job, you guys. Awesome. Yeah, overhead valve. And in the car world, so the manual I was just holding up, it's loading on the screen. Can you guys can see this manual slowly loading in, right? The PDF. Beautiful, thank you. Let's see. What I was going to say is in the car world, you know, manufacturers switched to overhead valves in the 1950s, right? Like your small block Chevrolet engine came out in 55. It was overhead valve. That was a pretty big deal. But small engine stuff for outdoor power equipment, specifically the types of engines that you would find on lawnmowers or log splitters, or, you know, those by and large didn't switch over to overhead valves in the 1990s and early 2000s. And now overhead valves are more common than flathead or L-head engines, but it's still fairly recent. So this is that complete manual. This is a PDF of that. In the beginning of the manual, it has this information sheet on model type and code, which is actually one of our other class assignments. So it is actually right in the manual. If you had an older engine, what I'll do is I'm going to close this screen out.
How do you find the lubrication thing? I didn't get that for our assignment.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was right. You just closed it, but it had like a list like this and this and this, and then lubrication.
Sure,
and it had those questions, but I could never find what the lubrication thing was.
Yeah, and it's a little tricky. Okay, so let me throw in another manual. I'm gonna type in L-head. L-head. Okay, let's see. Single. Oh, I think I gotta go like this. L-head after 80. All right. So this would probably be another popular manual. It's one that we often use in class if students have older engines. After 1981, they switched to electronic ignition, so that's why they have the cutoff, but they also have this for older than that. And let's find that page again with the model type and code. So you can see they got all kinds of, you know, information on how to use the manual and all the safety stuff. They have some recommendations on fuel. And this part of the manual, this beginning section, is very similar to like if you bought a new engine and it came with like the operator's guide. So it tells you like what oil to put in it and what fuel to use. It has that same information right here. So, and if you look at like these old engines, they don't need outstandingly good fuel. They want a minimum of 77 octane. Most, you know, our minimum these days is 87 octane, so that would work in there just fine. But not all engines are the same. For instance, if you have a Stihl chainsaw or something, Stihl actually wants 89 octane. They're a little bit more of a high performance engine. So they talk about the oils, but we're still looking for that page with the model type and code, which should be coming up here. And just a minute, there it is. All right. So we're looking for lubrication type, right? So it's kind of a weird deal. What I want you guys to take away from that assignment really is that the numbers that they stamp on engines is important, right? And if you're going to work on that engine, you have to know what you're working on. And that means you're probably going to want to do some research. And don't be surprised if you're working on a piece of equipment and somebody's changed the motor on the piece of equipment at some time in its life. I mean, I run into that all the time. I even run into it on cars. Like I'll have a student, he brings in a certain year model car, but he got an engine for it out of pick and pull that's like 1 year different, and that's why parts aren't working. You know, I had a student, he was trying to put a computer for a V6 in a car that had a V8 engine, and he was wondering why it was firing all the cylinders. So knowing exactly what you have is super important. Anyways, this third digit after displacement will tell you some information about the lubrication system, but they don't always specify. Like if you had a 0 here, it would say plain bearing, non-flange mount. Well, that didn't tell me anything about the lubrication system. But here's the default. In a small engine, the default is we do have to lubricate the engine somehow. So they're basically going to have some type of little dipper or oil slinger that's going to spin around in the engine and just grab some oil and throw it around. So if they don't specify anything on this list, like if it's a 0 or a 1, you can assume that it's splash lubrication. Now see how number 2 actually says splash lubrication, and so does this one. And then it actually gets into pressurized lubrication. Pressurized lubrication, like this number 7 here, that would be like a car engine where you have an oil filter where it has an oil pump. It takes oil from the bottom of the engine, from the sump, pumps it through an oil pump, a bunch of passageways, runs it through a filter, and then delivers that oil directly to your critical engine parts, like your connecting rod bearing and your main bearings. If it doesn't say anything about it, like the 0 or the 1, what you can assume is it's splash lubrication. So, Elizabeth, did that answer your question? I know it's not super intuitive. This system basically was made for Briggs internally, and I think it kind of evolved over the years. So it's not necessarily a perfect system. Also, keep in mind that this system, it is particular to Briggs and Stratton. So if I bought an engine from Harbor Freight Tools and it had numbers on it, those numbers wouldn't correspond to this information. And that's where like the car world has a little bit better standardization than small engines. In the car world, your car has a VIN number, vehicle identification number, and the government's basically helped kind of force the car manufacturers to standardize that number. So certain digits mean certain things, like the 10th digit of a car's VIN number is always the year of the car. But the small engine world isn't like that. So you really have to figure out whatever numbers are on whatever engine you're working at, and use Google or the internet or a manual, and try to decipher what those numbers are, so you know exactly what you're working on.
Okay.
So even in this manual, they give us a little example, and they tell us the design series. For me, the things that I think are the most important are the first digit, or maybe couple digits, tells you how big the engine is, and that's called the displacement. Now that's how big the engine is internally. So if I throw up my little drawing tools here, and I'm gonna, to the best of my ability, draw some engine parts here. Here is my piston, and it goes up and down in the cylinder, right? Well, if I figured out the area of the piston, and then I figured out the length of the cylinder or the stroke, right? I could multiply those guys together and figure out the actual volume inside here, right? And if we think of this engine as a pump where it brings in air fuel mixture, it burns it and then pumps it out the exhaust pipe, that's when you hear this word displacement, that's what that's all about, is how much air will we displace theoretically. So what I'm getting to is displacement is really like an internal size, not necessarily an external size. Obviously, if you have a small engine here on this end that's, let's say, 58 cubic inches of displacement, it's going to be physically larger on the outside, right? However, you can have, a bunch of these engines right in here that are different displacements, 10, 11, 12, but physically on the outside, they might all actually look the same. You might even put a tape measure on them, and the outside dimensions would be the same, but internally they're different. They either change the bore, right, how big the piston is, or they change the stroke, how far it goes up and down. And that would be hard to see from the outside. Anyways, so I think this displacement is super important because it lets you know basically how big the engine is. And when it's all said and done, if we think of our engine as an air pump, the bigger the engine's displacement is, the more power it should be able to make for us. I've had students and customers, for that matter, that like were buying a replacement engine for a pressure washer or a log splitter, and then they ended up not being happy with that engine because they didn't buy an engine that really met their needs. They might have bought an engine that was let's say 9 cubic inches, that was rated at a maximum of, let's say, 5 horsepower. But whatever device they were trying to run, that log splitter pump, it was asking for 5 horsepower all the time, and that engine would have a hard time keeping up with that demand. So I always err on a little bit of oversizing, so you don't have to work the engine over so hard on that piece of equipment. So anyways, so the displacement is super important. The other thing to get the right parts, of course, is to figure out what year was the engine built, and that's this part with the code here, where it breaks down not only the year but the month and the day. And sometimes the month and day is important. Sometimes they'll do like a mid-year change, and something before June was used one type of ignition coil, and something after that used a different type. In the car world, this is a big deal as well. It seemed like Ford would do this to me a lot, and you'd be trying to get parts, and they go, well, was that built in April or was that built in May? And that would make the part numbers be completely different. So, so to do this activity, it's one of these things where normally in class, I would basically just photocopy this page or give you guys the manuals, and I would send you loose out to the shop for some engines, and you look at the numbers on the engines and figure out what they were. When I tried to put this through on our distance learning, it became much more complicated. So
It worked for me.
what I
I mean, I
tried
was
to,
able to figure it
it
out.
did. Okay, so it was okay then. I mean, I tried to put pictures of stuff in a little presentation for you, where you could look at some engines. The idea was the last one, if I can find it here. Oh, here it is. The idea was that the last one, you would use your engine. And I know like not everybody's going to have a Briggs and Stratton engine, so you might have been having to use Google to figure out what your numbers were. But you know, what I want everybody to take away from that is that these numbers on the engine are super important for you to get the right parts. And if you go to a Briggs dealer, they'll ask you model, type, and code. And that's more important than, oh, it's a 6.5 horsepower overhead valve engine, that type of thing. There is some hidden stuff in here, which is kind of fun. Like now we know overhead valve, it's 6.5 horsepower. A side note of that is that if you went to a small engine shop today, you would not see a sticker that shows how much horsepower the engine produces, because these stickers are pretty misleading in that a lot of times the manufacturers would round stuff up. That was the most common. They'd round it up. Sometimes they'd round it down to have it be like an even 6 horsepower or 7 horsepower, when really it made a little bit more. And about 10, maybe 15 years ago now, there was a big lawsuit. So now they list like gross torque or an advertised torque rating. So that's, anyways, you might not see a horsepower rating on the motor like this anymore, and that's all based off that lawsuit. We were talking about displacement. This engine here happens to be 206 cubic centimeters. Now, we were talking about cubic inches. Briggs and Stratton is an old American company that's been around a long time, right? So that's why model, type, and code breaks down to cubic inches. But for all intents and purposes, cubic centimeters makes more sense. So they are doing stuff with centimeters and stuff. And if you did say you're working on a motorcycle engine, they're going to be using cubic centimeters, right? A smaller measurement than cubic inches. And that's kind of a side note. This is a 206 cc motor. And you know, around 200 cc's is pretty common for a lot of these little horizontal shaft engines. So you know, I was trying to get some pictures and stuff. So I'm hoping it worked for you. Like I said, it became a lot harder to do this through distance learning than I anticipated. But anyways, if I go back to this activity, it called it a quiz. I set it up as a quiz to make it easy for you to put answers in the boxes. I've been learning a lot using Canvas, and one of my colleagues tipped me off, instead of you guys having to like cut and paste big sections of the page, if I set things up as a quiz, which kind of seems weird because normally this would be a lab activity, not a quiz. But when I set it up as a quiz, that allows me to have a little box here where you could type in information and fill it out. Some of these things, maybe you can't find it. We were talking about the lubrication system. I said the default would be to splash. If there's something that is not on there at all, like a gear a gear reduction, you could put NA for not applicable on your engine, and that's fine too. It won't always work perfectly for everything. I guess one last side note on this assignment, although I'm not sure any of the motors I put on here were the style, but they talk about a recoil starter, and then there's also things called a rope starter. Recoil starters are probably what we're all most familiar with, right? You pull the rope and you let it go and it springs back in, right?
Is that
you
a
pull
rewind?
the rope. Yeah, rewind starter. Yeah, rewind, correct. Some of the really old engines, you would actually like lasso a rope around there, almost like you're, I don't know, putting a rope, a string on a yo-yo. You're going around and around, and then you pull it and the rope would come off on your hand. And then if you wanted to pull it again, you have to roll up the rope again. So that's why it doesn't just default to rewind for all of them. They actually have some old engines that were a rope starter. And then of course, a lot of the newer engines are using electric start, which is super nice. So speaking about that starter, let me go back to the modules tab, and I want to talk about kind of one of our first real diagnostic activities. And for cycle theory, oh, I got it, okay. Yeah, one of our first real diagnostic activities, I set it up as a quiz again. It's really just so that you have boxes to type in the information. So this would, you know, after we identified our engines and stuff, one of the first like hands-on things we would do on them is test them. And so a compression test, and I have the worksheet that I would normally use in class on here. A compression test is a pretty basic test to figure out the condition of the engine. However, we don't normally do compression tests on a lot of these small engines. However, it's something that's really applicable to two-stroke engines, and you can do it on a four-stroke engine, but it kind of throws off your readings. So I have on here for four-stroke engines that have a pull start, a leak down test is preferred. They'll limit compression to 80 psi. Let me show you what I mean. I was having a difficult time explaining this, and I want to show you the tool, that what the manual says and the tool, and kind of shed some light on all this stuff. So let's see, how do I want to do this? I'm going to go to screen share, and I'm going to share my whole computer screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my document camera here, which works, but it does get sometimes a little bit glitchy as I have a bunch of different things up here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm getting something. I'm just really zoomed in. There we go. Hey, there's that Briggs and Stratton manual. All right. So what I'm going to do is I've tabbed up some sections in the manual. And now, I don't know, it's 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. I could have also gone through the PDF, because remember this manual, we do have a PDF of it. But this is under section 2, troubleshooting. This happens to be that overhead valve engine manual. And it says, hey, check compression. Why this is so important, right, is that, like, you know, even if you were to replace the carburetor, that would be relatively inexpensive. Maybe $30, maybe $100 on the high end. A spark plug is relatively cheap, but if you have to rebuild the engine and replace the, you know, piston and rings, that starts getting very expensive. So before you dump a bunch of money in the engine, you'd want to, you know, check that compression. So it says page 27. I'll go to that page. All right. And there it says, hey, check compression. And then it doesn't say, hey, use a compression tester. It says, use leak down tester 19545. Well, what the heck is that? And it doesn't even show us a picture, which is a little frustrating. Briggs and Stratton redid this manual a few years ago, and to reduce pages, they got rid of pictures. I think I told you before I was a pictures guy, so that kind of frustrated me, but this is a leak down tester. And quite frankly, like it, it gives you more information than a regular compression test, but you have to be connected to shop air, and you got to pump shop air into this tool, and then it pumps the air into your engine to measure where that air pressure is leaking out of. And knowing that a lot of folks are not going to have compressed air at their house, I had to forego this thing. I will get a leak down activity loaded up, so you have the worksheet, and if people have air, they can mess around with it. But this would be what obviously Briggs and Stratton would prefer you to use, rather than a compression gauge like I have you using. And again, the reason that we're not using this is it is trickier to use, but the whole stumbling block is that you have to have compressed air to use it. Now the question comes into, well, why does Briggs and Stratton prefer you to use this tool? Well, it's a little bit more of a static test in that the engine doesn't move at all when you're doing this test. And so I don't like that it's static, but it does give you more information. Because let's say you had a burned exhaust valve. This would tell you how much air you're leaking. Let's say you were down here and your leakage is at 60%, right? You're 60% of the air that this tester would be pumping in your engine is blowing right out. And if you put your ear to the muffler and you hear it coming out of the muffler, you hear an air leak noise there, then you know, wow, I got a burned exhaust valve. So it tells you more information, but because the engine's also not moving, it takes the compression release mechanism out of the way. So I'm going to switch to another page of the manual and show you what I'm talking about here. Starters. Probably. Okay, section 10. It doesn't give us this manual doesn't give me the best picture of it, but this will come up as you do more of like that Briggs and Stratton online training. Ground into the camshaft, they actually have a little compression release mechanism. So this engine would probably make 120 PSI of compression, but if you had it making that much compression, if you went to pull start it, it'd rip your arm off. It would just like pull really hard. So the camshaft is actually set up to bleed off some of that compression. So it's got a built-in automatic compression release. Sometimes they'll call it like the easy start system or easy spin on other manufacturers. But it's got a built-in compression release inside that camshaft. So the reason that Briggs wants us to use the leak down tester really comes down to, instead of getting a full compression reading, it's always going to bleed some of that compression away. And like I said, at best, from my experience, you would maybe get 80 PSI of compression. So, it throws off the accuracy of the test, but it's still a valid test that we can do, because if you do the compression test and you're only getting, let's say 30 or 40, whoa, I got a serious problem, right? So anyways, that's kind of related to the pull start. Now, if you had an engine with electric start, it might not have that compression release, or it might have a compression release that isn't as aggressive. And so you would get better compression test readings on it. Speaking of compression test, on these kind of question and answer sessions that we have together, I always want to try to give you guys like a quick, really cool little test tip, right? So I'm going to grab an engine right here on my shelf and show you the easy 2-cycle compression test for your handheld power equipment. Okay, so I have a blower in my hand here. This is a 2-stroke engine, but the same thing holds true. Like, it needs to build compression for it to run right. Well, an easy test on an engine like this, like a string trimmer, a blower, something that you would hold in your hands, a chainsaw, was just to get it and to pull the rope, and see does it hold up its own weight. So if you see this thing's it's slowly going down. If I put it back up where it's in screen, it does go down, but it doesn't just like sink down right away, right? If I went to have it hold its own weight and the motor just sank to the bottom, that would be a sign that, hey, I don't have any compression at all. Also, if I went to pull this thing and it won't pull at all, well, now I probably have a seized engine. I have something mechanically wrong that's keeping it from spinning. So if you're doing a quick check on a motor, you know, it's a real easy way, right? If it has no resistance to pulling at all, hey, you don't have any compression, and you likely have a pretty serious problem with that engine. If it holds its weight, though, that's a pretty good sign that, you know, mechanically, that, you know, there should have some decent integrity. So, okay. So if I go back to some of our activities, and actually I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out this camera because I get so much stuff on the screen, it's hard to tell what's going on here. Okay, I'll go back to the modules tab. You know, this week, hopefully we're finishing up this module 1 stuff. I did get, and this kind of follows up with the model type and code. One of our like early assignments that we normally do is just looking up the service information about our engine. Earlier, I showed you at the beginning of the Briggs manual how it had information about like what fuel to use in it, what oil to use. It's got some information in there of how often should you check the air filter. That's what this assignment is all about. It's just learning a little bit more about the engine and you know, what's its displacement. We've talked about that. I have horsepower rating or torque rating because remember, a lot of times the sticker on the side these days will be torque and not horsepower now. And so the idea is that you would pick your engine and try to find out as much stuff as you can about it. Not super technical stuff, kind of just more informational stuff. And again, why is it a quiz? It seems weird that it's a quiz. It's normally a lab sheet you would do in class, but formatting it as a quiz gives me the ability to have little boxes for you guys to fill in, and then a way for it to automatically send to me. And I'm trying to not have you guys have to like print papers out and scan them and all kinds of craziness. All right, so I'll exit away from that one. And as we wrap up this module 1, this lines up pretty good with our online Briggs and Stratton stuff. So if I go back to the Power Portal website, I'll move my little annotation bar out of the way, and I'll go to Power Channel. And it's thinking about it, all right. I'll go to Technical Courses, and there's like 5 different ways to get there. I just picked this way because it was pretty easy. In our class, we are basically focusing on these basic sections within Briggs and Stratton. Okay, so we're going to do 5 certifications. Think of those as your 5 modules. So module 1 was, you know, how does an engine work? Basic 4-stroke cycle. This guy right here. I don't know why I'm just circling it. I could draw on it. Here's module 1, right? Module 2 is we're going to go a little bit deeper inside the engine and, you know, look at like what does it need to build compression. Then as we go through, we have our module 3 and fuel systems, and 4 on governors. And these 2 guys are closely related to each other. here's what I want you guys to know, um, especially related to the governors. If in this class, I'm really only asking you to take apart an engine because, hey, let's face it, it's a lot easier to take something apart than it is to get it back together again. And I just didn't feel right with asking you that level of complexity, trying to get it back together. And if you didn't have all the special tools, but most everybody should be able to get something apart and kind of figure out how stuff works. If you are going to reassemble your motor, put it together and make it run, and it's a 4-stroke cycle engine, it's going to have a governor on it, and you absolutely have to set the governor up correctly, because if you don't, it's very easy to have the engine, like you start it up, it revs out to the moon and blows up. Okay, so my warning is, if you're going to build your engine and you're going to have it, be put together and it's going to run at the end, really study this governor section. And then you probably also want to contact me. We'll go through the manual together, because the governors are pretty tricky to set up. And I'll be honest with you, like I did all kinds of motorcycles and go-karts and things where I would take the governor off. And it wasn't until I got really involved with outdoor power equipment that I really figured out how the governor worked and how important that was to set up correctly. So again, if you're going to build your engine and have it run, and it has a governor, it's a 4-stroke cycle engine, super critical that the static adjustment's done correctly. Make sure you contact me so I can help you with that, because it is a little tricky. So our 5 modules in the class basically line up with these 5 modules right here. And that works out pretty nicely. Now, if you are just gung-ho, crazy, you love this stuff, you can actually use your access through the Power Portal. You can go through all of Briggs and Stratton's training. You could actually, let me clear out these drawings here. You could actually go through here and you could become a Briggs and Stratton Master Service Technician. So see this MST exam? And, I went to Briggs school. I did this, I got MST certified. When I first started teaching, I was, I don't know, crazy or too gung-ho. And I thought, oh, this is easy. So my first time I taught the class, I said, oh, that we're all going to get MST certified. We crashed and burned. It was chaos. Students were mad. It was just, it was no good. And so I've really weaned it way back, and all we're doing is the basic stuff. We're doing these basic 5 areas. Now, notice when you go to exam, it shows this one on parts lookup, but on the last screen, it wasn't there. We're not worried about the parts lookup certification. So I am going to draw an X over that. And again, our 5 modules are 1, 4-cycle theory, compression, fuel, governor, and ignition. And that lines up with what I built for you in Kansas. And it's a pretty easy way to round through the engine. Now, I mean, technology is always evolving. There's new small engines that are electronically fuel injected. If you move on to like the advanced trainings, they do have EFI, electronic fuel injection training on here for those of you who are into that stuff. So there's a whole lot of information on this website, I guess is what I'm trying to get across to you. And I'm only requiring you to do this, but you can do a whole lot more if you want to do that. So, and I'll give you credit, extra credit for doing some extra stuff too. So, what I want to do though is I want to now go over to the Still website. It doesn't line up exactly as cleanly, but it's pretty easy. It's pretty simple, and Still, because they build a lot of handheld equipment, right? Chainsaws and the like, they still use a lot of 2-stroke engines. And so this is how we kind of cover 2-strokes. And I'm a big 2-stroke fan. I mean, I don't discriminate. I like them all, but after racing two-stroke go-karts for years and riding two-stroke motorcycles, I don't know, two-strokes are pretty special. So here we are in still, and if I go to training, again, there's all kinds of training that you can do. I'm not requiring you to do all of them. It doesn't split up super nice, but if I go to bronze training, you can see that there's these 9 modules. Now, you know, some of them are very specific to if you worked at a small engine shop that worked on still equipment, how do you use their parts and lookup system? What are their warranty policies? I'm having us focus on the ones that relate to actually working on the engine, which is bronze 6, 7, 8, 9. And I got some extra ones on there that they came out that I think are really good and important. I wish they would have put them in bronze. It would have been easier to find it, but I'll show you where that's at. So this week, the one that makes the most sense that lines up would be this bronze 6, because it talks about how does an engine work. This still training is not as fancy as Briggs in that it's basically just, you know, a PowerPoint. So I would always default to the Briggs and Stratton one first, because they have pretty nicely put together videos and stuff, and then kind of follow up with the still. But, you know, they talk about some of the same things, right? Like here's our L head or flat head engine versus overhead valve. They go through the 4-stroke cycles. But they also, and they got some pretty cool animations, but still, like I said, they do a lot of 2-stroke stuff. And as you see, like 2-strokes don't have intake valves or camshafts or exhaust valves. They're very, very simple, which also makes them very light, which is why they're still very applicable for something like a chainsaw, because I don't want to lug around a big heavy engine and hold it in my hands, right? I don't want to have not only the weight of the engine and the camshaft and all that stuff, but the weight of a whole quart of engine oil that's being held in the engine, right? So we're going to mix the oil with the fuel in a 2-stroke engine, and it helps keep the package nice and light. So they talk about different types of 2-stroke engines, reed valve engines versus piston port engines. And so this is the certification that lines up with this, you know, basic engine stuff that we're doing this week. A lot of your less expensive 2-strokes will be piston port. This would be like a string trimmer right here, or a weed eater is what most people call it. I said that at Still School when I was there years ago, and everybody got mad at me because weed eater is technically a brand and it's called a string trimmer, and so I'm careful not to say that these days. Reed valve engines, here's how you can tell the reed valve. This thing down here is the carburetor. I'll draw on it. This is the carburetor, and you see how the carburetor looks like it's going to like the bottom of the engine. It looks kind of weird. It's going towards the not in kind of like the middle center like that carburetor is, but it's going towards the bottom. That's your telltale sign you got a reed valve engine. That would be more common for like a chainsaw. Something that's a little bit higher performance would be a reed valve. It does make it a little bit more expensive to put together. But again, no, it's got a reed valve, but that's not like a regular valves in a 4-stroke cycle engine. So there's a series of slides that line up. I look at my 2-stroke engine as a great multitasker. In fact, I think this is important enough. I should probably write it on the screen, okay? So, you know how there's the 4-stroke cycles of a 4-stroke engine: intake, right? Intake, compression, power, exhaust, right? A 2-stroke engine does intake, and it does, and it does compression at the same time. So this piston's moving up, it's intaking in the bottom half of the motor, it's compressing air-fuel mixture that's already on top of the engine, on top of the piston there. All right, so the next stroke is it does, because I should clear out my drawings, is the next one it does power and it does exhaust at the same time. It also does something else. It does a bonus thing. It does transfer. So I look at a two-stroke engine as being a great multitasker. The piston's moving down on the power stroke because we burn the air-fuel mixture. It forces the piston down. As soon as it uncovers the exhaust port, then the exhaust gas will start to flow out. As the piston's moving down, there's air-fuel mixture down in the bottom of the engine that we sucked in before. So how do we get that above the piston? Well, there's got to be a passageway to get it from here to there. That's called the transfer port. And so as the piston moves down, it squishes the air-fuel mixture from down here up there, so it does transfer at the same time. Now, why isn't everything a two-stroke? Because, you know, it's smaller, it's lighter, there's less moving parts. It runs a whole lot dirtier, okay? As it's transferring the air-fuel mixture on top of the piston, some of the fresh air-fuel mixture gets just pushed right out the exhaust. So fuel economy on a two-stroke, not as good. Exhaust emissions, or what people would call smog, right? Not as good on a two-stroke engine. That's why you don't see cars and stuff using two-stroke engines. Also, how do we lubricate the bottom of the engine down here? Well, we got to lubricate it with the fuel because the fuel's floating around down here at the bottom. So we have to mix oil in with our fuel to lubricate the bottom of the engine. So again, that makes the emissions and stuff go up. All right, if I went all the way through this presentation, at the end, there's a little quiz you take. I will say that there's some pretty cool stuff on here. They have some pretty neat designs, like they have the stratified charge or stratified scavenging engine to make that two-stroke engine run a little cleaner. And I think what's important to note is it almost looks like it's got two carburetors. One carburetor doesn't give it any fuel though, just air goes through it. They also have an engine design called a four-mix, where it's basically like a four-stroke engine, but to keep the weight of it down, you're mixing oil with the fuel again. So, but I'm getting kind of long on time, so I'll get to the end of this thing. You can take the quiz at the end. Now, it's pretty hard to mess this up because if I answer a question wrong, it basically slaps me in the face and says, hey, buddy, this is the slide where we told you what to answer here. Read it again. So the idea is that you would read it again, close that out, and then actually, you know, answer this correctly. So I'll say the exhaust valve, and it'll tell me correct. If I miss a question again, right, and then I miss it again, it just restarts me. So there's really not a way for you to not be able to pass these. Like usually students don't have a problem getting the still certifications done once they've kind of figured out how it works. The question I think is kind of hard at the end is, how do you prove you've passed it, right? If you did all the bronze modules, like if I went to bronze training, if I did all 9 of these, it would actually, you could print out a really nice looking certificate. But I'm not asking you to do all 9, but you see how these ones have little green check marks? That shows me that you've passed them, right? And there's no way to not pass these with 100% because it will keep forcing you to do it over and over and over again until you get 100%. So I just need to know that you've done it. So if you want to, you know, screenshot this thing, screenshot it for me or something, so that you can send that to me so that I can see that you've passed them, that's fine. That's all you gotta do. So it's not quite as slick as the Briggs and Stratton one, but you know, it like I said, it has that 2-stroke stuff. It also has some important stuff with the carburetors that again are quite a bit different on these little engines than what you'd find on a Briggs and Stratton engine. So that's why it's super important, because I bet if any of you have had a problem with a chainsaw or a string trimmer, you know, there's probably a pretty good bet that it was related to one of these little tiny carburetors that they put on these things that look kind of weird, that are actually quite a bit different than what you'd find on like your lawnmower engine. And don't feel bad, because I would say the majority of my automotive teachers at American River College, they really struggle with these carburetors too. They're like, why don't, it's not like a regular carburetor. What's going on in there? So, all right. So to wrap, let's see. So to wrap this up, I'm scanning the chat to answer questions. Unlimited tries. Can we leave and come back? I think you can. That's how it's supposed to be. But I swear, when it comes to Canvas, sometimes I'll feel like I have everything set up perfectly, and then I have you guys do it and it doesn't work quite right. So what I will say is, if you're having problems with a actually, I guess if you're having problems with one of these worksheets that I essentially entered in as a quiz, so you have spots to write information down, you should be able to do this multiple times. But let me know if it doesn't work that way. On on quizzes on Still's website, like I said, it just kind of feeds you through again and again and again until you get it right. On Briggs and Stratton, it's a little different. With these tests, you get 3 attempts. Let me get that work bar out of the way. You get 3 attempts, and then what will happen is it will lock you out, and it'll say, look, basically Briggs is saying, hey, you need to hit the book some more. You need to study a little bit more, and then you can take the test again. So what I cannot remember right now is if it either locks you out for 24 hours, like it either counts the hours, or it's an overnight period. Regardless, here's where students will get caught out. If you procrastinate to the very last minute before it's due, and then try to do it real fast, and you blow through your 3 attempts, and you don't get a 75% or passing grade in those 3 attempts, well, you know, it's going to lock you out, and it's not going to let you do a better grade than that. Now, the next day, once the timeout period expires, you could go in there and keep going for a higher score. And so what I've always done for all my classes is I say, well, look, turn in however good you did with the day it was due. Let's say you got a 65% or a 70%. You can screenshot that and send it to me. In a normal class, I would have the students print it out on their, hand me the printout. But, send me what you did. And then if you want to go in there and try for a better score, keep trying. And I will give you some additional credit for getting a better score. If we get through this thing, and I think we're going to probably get to this point where you guys are going to get on one of these tests in Briggs and Stratton, and you're going to get super frustrated, and you're going to be like, I think the test is wrong. There's mixed up answers, or there's something not right. We can use that one of our weekly meetups, our weekly question and answer sessions, and I'll go through and help take a test, and we'll see what we come out with. The questions are very tricky. Remember that Briggs and Stratton has set up this whole website so you could go through and become master certified. So they purposely have made these questions kind of like your DMV driver's test, where the questions are super tricky to answer. What often happens to students is they'll get, maybe you get a 75% and you're like, darn it, I want 100%. Or you got an 80% and I want 100%. And then you'll start to second guess questions that you got correctly because it doesn't tell you exactly what you missed. So what I would do is with every question, the questions you're certain about, write those down. Like the ones that you're sure about, don't change your answers on those. And the ones you're not sure about, spend time looking up the videos or going through your book or the presentations to look up those answers. And if you still find yourself at your absolute wit's end and you're like, I can't find the answers to this, you know, like I said, I have no problem with, we'll go through on some of these things and do them together to help you figure out what it is. But they are purposely pretty complicated. And I know for a lot of folks, and I was included in this, I was like, it's just a small engine, okay? It's not that big of a deal. Well, I'll tell you from experience, I've blown up a lot of small engines having the attitude of, oh, it's just a small engine. Everything that applies to the engine in your car applies to these engines. So oil clearances that are 0.003 of an inch or less, like that's still a very tight clearance that needs to be correct. You might think, oh, these tests seem kind of hard, but you know, I mean, the engineering behind these engines is still pretty sophisticated, and they're pretty strict on you know what they want their techs to know. So they're purposely difficult questions. So
is that the test that we took, like that was due today, that you made for tomorrow?
Yeah. This would be it. And
this is
and
definitely different questions than mine, and they are way harder. I'm glad I had the version I got. I don't know some of these answers.
So there's you got it. So you see, this one has 12 questions on it. There is a bank for this test. I want to say there's probably a bank of about 25 questions. And so you may not get the same 12 questions every time. And sometimes you get lucky and you get some easy ones, and sometimes you get some harder ones. You know, and it's definitely not, it's not a perfect system, but it does get you thinking and looking stuff up, and it does expose everybody to a little bit of manufacturer training. So in that part, it is pretty good. But yeah, this has some. I mean,
remember some of this in the videos, like because we're supposed to review like a video, right? And then we could use the book.
Yeah. So here's the kicker: is that not every single question is necessarily answered in a video, especially answered in a video under the basic section. What you'll find is in any of these tests, I would say 80% are answered in those basic videos. But as the technicians go through this, Briggs expects them to have that textbook that I put on the class list, the one that's written by Bruce Radcliffe, that is the guy who's in charge of this whole standards and training within Briggs. They're expecting that you have that book and you have the videos, and between the two, those two things together would answer these questions. What my cheat for you is, if I go back to the power channel, which is the videos, right? You can always cheat and go to some more advanced stuff. So if I go to the intermediate and I go into like diagnostics or failure analysis, or like the carburation one is good. Those will help answer some of those questions. If you're like, I didn't see the answer to that question, sometimes they have the answers kind of woven. It's like the question's a little bit on that borderline between basic and intermediate, and it seems like the answer is in the intermediate area. So it's not a perfect system, but it gets you thinking, and I'm pretty flexible. Like if you're having a lot of problems and stuff, you know, turn in your best score you could get, and we'll go over it. Especially if I have a bunch of people and they're all really struggling with it. So the governor's one is that's a one that commonly everybody seems to get frustrated about, is that governor's test. So anyways, let's see. So you have another question. I want to make sure I answer it. Does a two-stroke engine have a flywheel? Yes, it is going to have a flywheel. In fact, the flywheel on this engine right here, it's kind of hard to see, but underneath this cover here, it's got fins on it in there, and that's the flywheel. It's got little cooling fins on it, and the flywheel almost acts like a fan to draw air in here and over the engine. So not only do you need the flywheel to kind of smooth out the power pulsations and keep the momentum going, keep it spinning. And by the way, if you had a bigger flywheel, it would make the engine run smoother, right? But of course, it would make it heavier. It would make it accelerate more slowly. But the bigger the engine, or the more smooth you want to make it run, a heavier flywheel will help it out. To give you a quick note on that, years ago I had a motorcycle that was real peaky, real hard to ride. You know, I was always wheeling out and crashing into stuff. I put a heavier flywheel on that motorcycle, and it made it so much more rideable. You wouldn't stall out. So yeah, every engine will have a flywheel. And on our small engines, they usually put cooling fins on the flywheel, and they make that flywheel act like a fan to blow air over the engine to cool it. So one of the things you're supposed to do if you operate a small engine is make sure that there's no leaves or junk clogging up these air vent holes. You're supposed to brush that off, and this is called the finger guard. It's to keep your fingers from sticking in the fan there, but to keep that cleaned off so you don't overheat the engine. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah,
and what I'm going to do is leave you guys because we went a little bit over on time, but I still want to leave you with two tech tips that are important for taking stuff apart and putting stuff back together. And I'm going to use the manual to do that. Well, you know, I'll make it 3 tech tips because what I will say is that you can learn a lot reading the manual. And I know nobody likes to do that, but oftentimes at a pretty young age in the auto shop, you know, I would have my more experienced counterparts. They'd be like, "Oh man, how'd you know how to do that?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, the new parts came with instructions, and I read the instructions." Right? So like, you know, if you want to be smart, read the instructions. If you don't want, you know, people to know, maybe don't let other people see you reading the instructions, but read those instructions. That'll go a long way. Okay, so one of the things is if your engine is you're going to put it back together, it's going to run, certain surfaces need to be nice and flat. So like this is the top of the engine block where the cylinder head would bolt down. That sucker's got to be perfectly flat. So you would want to take a straight edge, and you can get one that you would get like a combination square from your local hardware store. And if you haven't let it get all banged up, or if it's new or whatever, that'll make a pretty decent straight edge for a small engine to check and make sure things are flat. I'm bringing this up because oftentimes I'll see this surface is all messed up. Students put their engine back together and it keeps blowing the head gasket because the sealing surfaces are not flat. So check to make sure that things are flat. My other tip for you is if you're going to put your engine back together, or even first just taking it apart. If you want to take it apart with the thought that, hey, I might be putting this thing back together, so you're not just taking it apart with a hammer or something. Notice how like this is a side cover, right? And then this is a different shaped side cover. But if I look at these images, they got little numbers next to the bolts, right? So whenever you have a set of bolts and they're kind of spread all over, there's going to be a torque sequence or a tightening sequence. What I would recommend you do is if you go to take it apart, if you don't want the parts to warp on you, take it apart in the opposite of the tightening sequence. So if I was tightening this piece on, I would tighten this bolt first, and then I go to that one and that one, right? 3, 4, 5. And I would do it in stages. So I might start up, let's say the torque spec for those bolts is, let's say it's 90 inch-pounds. Well, I'm not just going to go right up to 90 inch-pounds. I would start at like maybe do them all at 30 inch-pounds, and then I would go 60 inch-pounds, and then I would finish at 90 inch-pounds, and I would kind of go in this pattern each time. And I'm kind of spreading out that torque so I don't warp things. Well, also when you take it apart, go the opposite. So if I'm going to take it apart and I don't want to mess it up taking it apart, I'll loosen this bolt first and I'll just crack it loose, but I won't take it all the way out. And then I'll just crack that one loose. And then, oops, 7, I'm going backwards. So 7, 6, I'll crack this one loose. Then I'll crack that one loose. And I'll go opposite torque, crack them all loose, and then I'll take them out. So if I'm real careful, I'm less likely to warp things taking stuff apart. And then when I go back together, I follow the torque sequence. I do it in stages. The other thing I do is I would thread all these bolts in with my fingers first, and get them so they're all threaded in, and so everything's lined up, and then I start tightening stuff down. If I just went straight and I tightened this bolt down and none of the other bolts were even in the holes, it's likely to twist everything to the point that it's not going to line up. It's not going to go together, right? So you always put everything together loosely first, and then you start tightening stuff down in a sequence, and I recommend you do it in stages. These engines are largely made out of aluminum, right? Because aluminum's nice and light, but aluminum's the same material that your soda cans are made out of, right? So it's not a very strong metal, and so it's easier to warp these little small engines than it is to warp an engine, in your car or truck or something. And so some of the common things I experience in class where students have engines that fail, that don't run or blow up, or it comes down to like taking it apart and not paying attention, and also tightening stuff up and not following these sequences and stuff. So, all right. So that was my last tech tip for you. I'm sure I will come up with more tech tips next week. And like I said, I'm working on more videos. Does anybody have any other questions? And you can either, just yell them out or post them on the chat. Go ahead.
All right. If we got assignments completed, let's say up to July 20th, can we turn them into you? Send you a copy of them?
Yes, you can turn. Okay. Yeah, you can turn assignments in early. In fact, one of the things I am kind of struggling with is I really don't want everybody to wait till the end to do their assignments. And remember, I would tell you your big 3 assignments in class are really is taking apart a carburetor, taking apart a 2-stroke engine, and taking apart a 4-stroke engine, right? Normally in class, we do like the 4-stroke engine first. But I also understand that might be kind of daunting for you, especially on your own. So I initially had staged all the due dates in the normal order that we would do things in class. But I want you guys to think about this. If you guys think it would be better just to have them all due at the end, so if you felt more comfortable taking apart the carburetor first, then work on that part first, because there's less parts and pieces to a carburetor, right? It just doesn't, you would be a little bit out of sequence of stuff. But I want to make sure that you feel comfortable working on stuff. The 4-stroke cycle engine is going to have, by and large, normal circumstances, it's going to have the most parts and pieces to it. 2-stroke's going to have less parts and pieces, and a carburetor is going to be the simpler one yet. But so I can change those due dates. I want you guys to think about that. I just am a little nervous if I make everything due. I want to say August 3rd or August 5th is our last day of class. I don't want everybody wait till the end and then it to be chaos. But if you feel more comfortable taking apart your carburetor first and starting with that, just contact me and we'll get it figured out, because I want to make sure this works for you. And I realize that the whole concept of having you guys take apart stuff at home anyways is, can be a little bit overwhelming. And so I don't want to blow you up on that. So, but yeah, if you get stuff done early, by all means, you can get it loaded on there. There's still things I'm trying to get loaded on. Like I had done it one way and I realized that it wasn't very intuitive on what I wanted you to do. And so I'm fixing some things. I recently added a valve lapping activity, which is, again, something we'd normally do in class. It makes sense if you've taken your engine apart. If you've taken apart a 4-stroke engine, You got the cylinder head right there. You can lap the valves. I'm working on some videos and extra content. So anyways, if you have a, go ahead. Go ahead
Thanks
again.
for thank you for going with the flow with us. That's great. We could turn them all in if we get some done. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good. Again, if you have questions, reach out to me, and I'm here to help you. And like I said, I'm working on more content. And I'm trying to fix my setup. I just got a better web camera to make this thing work a little bit better, and a better microphone to try to eliminate some of the background noise. So I'm learning on this online thing with you. So I'm super flexible. I want to make sure this course works for you guys. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So as far as what should you be working on, so we should be transitioning now from module 1 stuff over to module 2 information. The reason, I recommend doing that is what I find in the class is, the students want to know how the engine works. So the first modules on 4-cycle theory and basically how does the engine work and the compression, those lend to how does an engine work, what's going on inside. And once you know what's going on inside the engine, then it makes sense what the job of the carburetor has to do. So that's why we do the engine first and the carburetor second. Even though on the surface it might seem like the engine's more complicated, I think from an understanding level, the carburetor makes more sense when you know what the engine's asking of it and how the engine works. So yeah, start moving on to module 2, and use the calendar to kind of keep track of what's coming up next for you to do. And if you have questions, send them your way. I'm going to just go out on a limb and tell you, you're probably going to come across some assignment in this class that I tried to load it and something's not going to load right or work right or something. And so, I'm relying on you guys to let me know so we can get it fixed and make it right. Okay. All right. Well, I've taken up too much of your night already. We're 20 minutes past time. So I'm going to let everybody go if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Take care. It'll take me about a day, but what I'm going to do is get this recording fixed up and get it loaded on the website. So for those students who were not able to be with us tonight, that they can watch it later and kind of learn up on what we did. So thank you for being interacting on the live session. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.